This week in Agribusiness, serving America's most essential industry, with agriculture broadcaster Orion Samuelson and yours truly, Max Armstrong, and featuring agriculture meteorologist Greg Solier. This week in Agribusiness is brought to you by Firestone. You never farm alone.
As the calendar flips to October, harvest is underway across the Corn Belt. Hello, folks. Thanks for joining us here on This Week in Agribusiness. I'm Mike Pearson in the studio. We'll hear from Max Armstrong in just a little bit, but to start the show, we've got a special guest joining me at the desk. Greg Solier, Chief Meteorologist for This Week in Agribusiness, joins us. And Greg, let's talk about this ongoing drought. The entire country really has been gripped by this thing at various points across the summer. How do we sit right now?
And especially across the western states, but a quick snapshot across the country, you can see it's really almost half to two-thirds of the nation in some sense of extreme dryness or exceptional drought, really focused across the western states. And if we take a look at that 11-state western region, look at the shades of orange and red. And despite some modest improvement into western Washington state, the beat goes on. And there was actually a fairly robust monsoon season in the southwestern states, so we just marginally improved drought conditions there. 90 to 95% of the western region in some sense of an extreme or exceptional drought category right now.
You know, Greg, we've been hearing stories throughout the year of growers in that southwestern region getting their water allocations cut. Of course, municipalities have been struggling. As you look down the line, as we get through winter, are growers in the southwest going to get a reprieve? Is there maybe alleviation of this drought in the forecast?
Even with a normal precip season with La Niñas, they tend to be either normal or below on moisture across a wide area of the west. It's the plains and Midwest that tend to get into sort of a character-building wintertime precipitation season out in that part of the country. And really, speaking of the Corn Belt, if you want to take a look at it here into those eastern areas, and it's certainly this dryness and this expansion of drought into areas of the eastern Corn Belt has allowed for an early harvest scene going on, even, of course, in the western areas as well, coming off a pretty tough and challenging summertime season. There's been some modest improvement into sections of Minnesota, Iowa, Missouri. I believe it was Minnesota leading the pack with beans cut so far into this harvest season, and some drier areas on to the east, and still southern Wisconsin, northern Illinois, kind of on the cusp of the drought pattern as it applies to the eastern Corn Belt.
Well, Greg, I know there are a lot of farmers and ranchers in the northern plains. Looking at the Dakotas, North and South Dakota, who have had to liquidate herds. They've seen pasture conditions deteriorate here over the past 12 months. You mentioned La Niñas could build some character. Are they also going to build up water tables?
They hopefully will. Now, that will be certainly hinging on getting some precip in there this fall season. And here is the northern and central plain states areas. Recall earlier in the spring and summer season, we had some improvement through Nebraska and Kansas. That has now taken a turn back in the wrong direction. Ongoing, historic, however you want to label it, across especially the Dakotas, North Dakota, and not to forget the southern Canadian prairie as well. They were in the midst of this extreme drought pattern. So if we get the moisture in before the ground's locked down, all the while better. But I think as we get deeper into this winter season, more and more the Dakotas, the Midwest, the Corn Belt in line for more significant moisture from wintertime and going forward from there.
Well, Greg, you know, one of the things we've seen throughout this season is the haves and the have-nots. The folks that need rain aren't getting it, as we've seen there in the West Coast. Right. And the folks that don't need it, the Mississippi Delta, that southeastern Gulf, they have just been inundated. Looking for that La Niña shift, is that wetness across the eastern seaboard going to maintain itself all winter?
I don't think so. I think as it applies to the fall season here, if we take a look at the southeastern and eastern part of the country, remember they've had a spat of tropical weather systems as well, and there were some areas of moderate drought into the mid-Atlantic region. They have since improved. Now, if we were to kind of reverse course and head back across areas of the southern plains, now there in through especially Oklahoma and Texas, we had improvement during the course of the spring, part of the summer season, a couple of significant tropical systems. Now look at Oklahoma and Texas, back where we started with ongoing severe to extreme to exceptional drought conditions. Thank goodness, at least in the short term, the past few days, we've had a significant rain come through the central and southern plains. They were dusting in, as they call it, that winter wheat crop. Hopefully the rain's not too excessive and just enough to get some good establishment and germination on the southern plains here over the next few days.
Well, Greg, we always appreciate your insights. We'll be talking to you later on in the show about what to expect here over the next few weeks.
We'll see you then.
Well, all of that drought and dryness certainly created a powder keg in the markets throughout this past year. We also had the USDA kind of light the fuse on that powder keg earlier this week with their quarterly grain stocks report. Joining us to discuss these numbers and everything else in the markets is Naomi Bloom from Total Farm Marketing. Naomi, USDA kind of snuck a few extra bean bushels in on this quarterly grain stocks report, didn't they?
They did. Ending stocks came in larger than pre-report estimates at 256 million bushels. So larger than estimates and even a little bit on the high side of expectations as far as the range goes. And they found higher yields for last year's crop. So that is part of the reason why the ending stocks were higher. Of course, the market did not care for that expectation and that news, and soybeans pushed lower after that number came out, down about 30 cents right after the report was released. So definitely weighing on the market and prices. And then, of course, as we've been visiting with clients, we're so far hearing that soybean yields are coming in closer to APH levels, more of an average crop size, not record by any means, but it's not small. So between that news and the quarterly stocks report, soybeans came under pressure as we finished out the week.
Well, I would like to talk a little bit more about that soybean number. Naomi, 256 million bushels in ending stocks for soybeans. The trade was expecting 175 million bushels. So there's 75 million bushels that the USDA found. I mean, in the big scheme of things, 256 still seems very tight. Can you help put that into perspective for us?
It is very tight, and that'll keep the balance sheet snug going into this, finishing up this crop season year. And also will keep a fight for acres for the next year. We still have tight ending stocks in many grain commodities right now between the United States and North America. So in one regard, we're not totally out of the woods yet because we do need to make sure that all those acres get planted next year. And then we still have the growing season for South America to get through during our winter months. So probably going to see the markets have a little bit of a setback here just because the news wasn't friendly. But at the same time, I don't think you can see prices just totally fall off and fall lower because the balance sheets overall are still quite tight.
And Naomi, in the soybean market specifically, it sounds like the next real potential news item that could cause this market to rally again might be Brazilian weather. The demand, it seems like we've kind of got cooked into it. What are you hearing down out of Brazil on soybean planting?
We're still hearing that the planting conditions are extremely dry, so they're not planting at a fast pace down there. And there's a lot of concern that the production is going to be potentially limited, again, because of how dry they are starting their season. They like to have good rain conditions as they get going with planting. Otherwise, it just is essentially kind of a bust for them in some regards. It doesn't pay out as producers hope because they're thinking that the production levels would be smaller. And so the farmers down there, though, have also been actively selling on what they had their rally recently. And we need to see them have more better rains. Otherwise, globally, we're in a situation where we are not going to have enough production. So I'm curious to see what the USDA does on the October report for global production and global ending stocks, because not just the United States and Canada, as I was saying earlier, with the tight production levels and the tight ending stocks, it is still a global issue. It
certainly is. And of course, we see a global market for that U.S. corn as well. USDA reported their quarterly grain stocks for corn, again, a little higher than analyst expectations. Naomi, what was your thoughts on that Thursday report?
Yeah, the ending stocks came in for the quarterly stocks report at 1.236 billion bushels, and that was higher than trade expectations. But just like soybeans, we still have a situation where the overall ending stocks and the balance sheet is still tight. Now, the thing with corn, of course, is that the yields so far nationwide are not fabulous. They are all over the place in terms of yield. And so I think that what you're going to be seeing is a fight for acres potentially for next year, especially with these input costs just absolutely out of control. We have producers telling us that they're going to need $5 new crop corn to even potentially break even. And that's, I believe it wholeheartedly, because you have the anhydrous costs, you've got nitrogen costs, you've got all that fertilizer cost that is doubled in value. So producers need better prices for the December 22, and we will definitely have a fight for acres in front of us.
We'll discuss this in more detail after this with Naomi Bloom. This portion of This Week in Agribusiness is brought to you by AgriGold, your seed ally in the field with unparalleled options that perform on your farm. Learn more at agrigold.com. And we're back talking markets with Naomi Bloom from Total Farm Marketing. Naomi, you mentioned something at the end of our last segment that I think is on every producer's mind, and that is these climbing input costs. As you look out through the rest of this year, where do you expect to see input costs go from here?
I think that they're honestly going to be trading in a sideways to higher pattern yet, just because of the global snafus that we're still seeing as we recover from COVID and all the transportation issues that have been there. Plus, demand has been actually pretty strong. We've got people out and about, so the demand for energy is there. And then just unfortunate that with the fertilizer costs so high, and it's more of my understanding a transportation issue, and then just not being able to get the product where it's needed. So hopefully that can get figured out by spring, but it does sound like for the fall, people are not going to be able to have their fall field work for fertilizer that they would like to have. So we're going to most likely see those costs still go high and work higher. We also have to get through the debt ceiling issue and see what Congress is going to be doing about that, because that affects the value of the dollar. But overall, if the energy prices work higher, one would think and anticipate that the grain prices would work higher as well, because of how they're all tied together with biofuels.
Well, Naomi, I want to talk to you about biofuels, I guess, in particular. We saw phenomenal demand for ethanol. We saw ethanol plants posting huge basis over the summer, really encouraging growers to get that corn out of the field early. A lot of folks responded. What have you been seeing lately with basis around the country, both for corn and soybeans?
We are actually seeing basis levels stay strong. We are seeing a lot of places throughout the Midwest offering stronger basis levels through into the first week of October, because they want that early crop to get harvested. In North Dakota, a client shared with me that basis at one processing facility is 2 cents under between now and next summer. So we are seeing a fight for demand for the North Dakota producers, and they're going to have an interesting spring as they decide, do they plant corn, soybeans, or do they go back to some of those traditional specialty crops like barley or oats, canola, even sunflowers. So North Dakota market is its own little niche, I think, right now, and just going to be an interesting story to watch commodities unfold. A lot of it's still, of course, affected by the value of the U.S. dollar. And then if that dollar can work lower, that'll be good for our exports. We do need to see that export market pick up the pace.
Well, we certainly do. And Naomi, the other market that was reported on Thursday in that quarterly grain stocks was the wheat market. And that was the only place we actually saw a drawdown in supply versus expectations. Can you explain to us a little bit about what happened there?
Quarterly stocks for wheat came in at 1.78 billion bushels. That was lower than expectations. We also had the all wheat production report, and that came in lower than expectations as well. So the wheat market was the market that responded higher right off the gates when that report came out, trading nearly 20 cents higher at times. And then again, I think that just keeps the market overall still range bound in the bigger picture, where we have tight supplies yet going into this next growing season. And again, it's not just the United States, it is the Northern Hemisphere.
It is. And do you anticipate seeing wheat feedings be strong through the remainder of this year?
That's a good question. I could see that potentially as a scenario in maybe just localized places, depending on if they had excess corn or not a lot of corn, and that has just been so different throughout the Midwest.
Naomi, the World Dairy Expo happening right now in your backyard there in Wisconsin. Are there going to be anything to celebrate for dairy producers here over the next couple months?
Well, you know, dairy prices have been inching higher, and the reason they've been inching higher, of course, is that our export markets are just so fantastic for the dairy market. And production, while still up from year-ago levels, has been tapering down. So we are overall starting to see less production coming down the pipeline and just strong demand for all dairy products around the world. So that's got the milk market actually back above $18. And so that is giving some producers a little bit more something to smile about.
All right, Naomi Bloom from Total Farm Marketing. We appreciate you joining us on This Week in Agribusiness.
Thanks for having me.
Chad Colby's look at agriculture technology comes your way next, brought to you by the IBM Watson Decision Platform. Combining AI with Internet of Things data to help agribusiness increase yields, improve quality, and drive sustainability.
Chad Colby is our roving technology reporter, and in his job he gets to talk to a lot of different farmers. And they don't always just talk about technology. Sometimes they talk about safety, which is important at harvest time.
The harvest season is in full effect here in the central part of the United States. Hi, everyone. I'm Chad Colby, and on this week's technology segment, I'm going to take a step back and remind everyone about taking that extra moment about being safe on your farming operation. Last week, if you didn't join us on the show, Max had an interview with an Illinois State Trooper and talked about giving yourself a little bit more space, but I wanted to back up a little bit. Spend that extra time before you take your equipment out on the road and do that walk around. And the reason why I bring it up, that quick, maybe 1 minute walk around in the morning or in the evening to make sure all your lights work, to make sure everything's intact, especially if you're using tracked equipment, just keeping an eye on everything is going to make sure that's a safer operation going down the road. Even this past week for me, I was following these gravity wagons, and you can see it's got a bright, slow-moving vehicle sign on the back, but I noticed his lights weren't on. And as I passed that tractor, I realized the tractor lights were on, part of them, but not all the flashers. And you can see what a difference that makes going down the road. And when you meet equipment on the road, be aware of your surroundings. You might need to give them a little more space. The other thing I wanted to mention, too, we've had super dry conditions here in the vast majority of the Midwest, and there has been a lot of fires in the field. I talked to a good friend of mine this week that had 2 different fires on 2 late model combines. Now, they were able to detect it only because they smelled it when the operator was out of the cab. Again, get out of that cab, walk around, educate your team. The guy in the auger cart, the guy in the semi, have that conversation with him. Hey, if you smell something, stop and get out, especially if you see anything with your eyes. That white smoke is a big giveaway. And myself included, I've been involved in fires with equipment in the field, and there is nothing like that disruption. So be safe, as always, and have a great harvest. For This Week in Agribusiness, I'm Chad Colby.
Lots of good tips there as harvest season approaches. Chad also mentioned keeping a small handheld lawn and garden sprayer, the pump type, in the truck full of water. So if you've got a hot spot in the combine, you can soak it down before you add oxygen, which can, of course, add a spark. Fire Prevention Week is next week. Max talks later in the show about the importance of rural firefighters across the country. Welcome back to This Week in Agribusiness. Fire Prevention Week is kicking off on Sunday, and we wanted to do something to highlight some of those things we can do to be a little safer in the home. Several of our farm broadcasting friends also serve on volunteer fire departments, so we wanted to check in with a few of them. Joining me first is Dwayne Murley from KWMT in Fort Dodge. Dwayne, you are a volunteer firefighter. This time of year, of course, we're getting prepared for safety at harvest. What kind of tips do you have in mind for our growers as they get those combines out in the field?
Yeah, Mike, hey, thank you for having me on. Yeah, a 30-year member of the Rockville City Fire Department. And some of the tips I would have here at harvest, I guess more than anything, just make sure the combines are blown off at the end of the day. And a lot of times, Mike, anymore, the gas and battery-powered blowers, they actually work the best just to keep the machines clean. And I would say, too, one of the most important things is making sure the bearings are properly greased. And a lot of field fires start by sparks dropping from a combine. And really the same goes for the tillage equipment, too, making sure those pieces of tillage equipment are greased and we're not dropping any sparks from bearings that may be wore out. And another thing too, Mike, I think is keeping track of your fire extinguisher, making sure they're fully charged. And one thing we see here in Iowa, the National Weather Service is always good about posting red flag warnings for when conditions are favorable for fire conditions. So it's a good idea to kind of keep an eye on the forecast and news from the National Weather Service as well.
It is. And don't be burning outside when you've got one of those red flag warnings, Dwayne. We've also got a lot of farmers who are spending some time this winter in their shop, and there are some fire risks in farm shops, aren't there?
Yeah, I think one of the things too, Mike, we just need to keep in mind is making sure the heaters and furnaces are clean, make sure they're in operating order, making sure the gas connections aren't leaking, and you know, taking that time right now before the weather does get cold and we are out in those shops.
Absolutely. And Dwayne, of course, Household Safety Fire Prevention Week takes place during harvest, but you're looking at safety year round. What should folks be thinking about in their houses?
Yeah, exactly, Mike. We always talk about smoke detectors. We like to change those batteries twice a year. Times when the clocks change is a good reminder to make sure those batteries are freshened in the smoke detector. But what a lot of people might not know, those smoke detectors are only good for about 10 years. So there's actually a little stamp on the back of them that tells when the smoke detector has, served its life. And it's a good idea to keep track of that. Maybe put up a new smoke detector for $10. I mean, smoke detectors do save lives. And one thing too, this time of year when it starts to get cold, we start to see space heaters plugged into extension cords. Those extension cords get hot, and that's a definite fire risk right there, Mike.
It certainly is. Dwayne, thank you so much for coming on and for telling us what to watch for Fire Prevention Week.
Thank you, Mike.
Susan Littlefield, also a volunteer firefighter over in Nebraska. We've talked to her many times in her regular role as the farm director for KRVN. Susan, thanks for taking the time to talk to us. Tell us a little bit about the training that volunteer firefighters have to go through.
Volunteer firefighters, it doesn't matter whether they're EMS, fire, or a combination of both. It is something that we do not only on a monthly basis, but we go to classes a lot. In the evenings, some of them are in person, some are still on that virtual aspect, but we are constantly training as technology changes, as new information is found out. The thing is, we want to stay up to date on what's available to us, so we bring better service to those in our community.
And it's all about keeping those communities safe. Susan, I would imagine across a rural countryside, we've got a lot of different threats for fire, and volunteer firefighters, by definition, are working a main job on the other side. What's it like keeping staffers around? Is that a challenge?
It can be, especially during the daytime. I'm fortunate that I work from home, and I work for a great company that says, as long as I'm not on the air, I can attend and go out to that fire or ambulance call that's needed. But that's the biggest struggle right now, is being able to fill those vacancies during the day, because folks maybe don't work within the community that they're at, and they're gone. Pager goes off, accidents and fires still happen. It doesn't look at the time clock to see where people are. But having employees that say, or employers, I should say, that say, go for it, we want you to be a part of it, really does help too.
And Susan, so how do volunteer fire departments or rural fire departments handle those issues with getting enough folks around to address these problems?
There's two simple words: mutual aid. The pager goes off. If we don't have enough people to assist at that fire, they immediately will contact the county dispatcher, and then they'll dispatch out the neighboring fire departments to come help. But we a lot of times mutual aid no matter what. For us, in our department, if we've got an accident on Highway 81, Highway 92, we'll immediately call out the neighboring fire department to be there to help. But it doesn't, county lines don't matter. We will continue to help out, and when pager goes off, we'll help them, they help us. And that really helps when we got the lack of volunteers at that specific time.
Susan, tell us a little bit about the equipment behind you. I've got to imagine it can be tough to keep that equipment looking as good as it does.
Well, it takes a lot of pride, too. This is our engine. This is engine 1 from Rising City Volunteer Fire Department. We cover 106 square miles, so we do cover a large portion. And so this truck has got all the bells and whistles on it that we need, whether it's for a structure fire, a car accident, anything that we might need it. As you can see, we've got the ladders, the big tubes that you see over my shoulder. Those are to be used for when we're using portable dump tanks and when we're in a rural area of fires that we might not be able to have a fire hydrant nearby. But it's got absolutely everything that we need to be able to fight a fire and more. We've got the SCBAs, which is our air packs that we wear. And everybody's got to be trained. Everybody needs to know how to drive it, how to run the equipment, because you never know if you're going to be put in that seat.
You never know. Susan, thanks so much for your service, and thanks to all the volunteer firemen and women across the country.
This Week in Agribusiness, serving America's most essential industry, is brought to you by Firestone. You never farm alone. Welcome back to this weekend's edition of This Week in Agribusiness. Still to come, Greg Solier's agriculture weather forecast for this harvest season. We'll see if it stays nice and wide open in the days ahead. Farm financing, a discussion here for the next few minutes, financing the operating expenses of your business. And here to visit with us about it is Bill York from Farm Op Capital. Your firm is fairly new, right, Bill?
Yeah, we've been in business. We started in 2017. We're just beginning our fourth season. So, yeah, we're new to the farm lending space.
I just thought it was so appropriate to talk about it during harvest season because you folks take a little bit different approach. You're ready to finance farm operating expenses right now instead of waiting till the wintertime.
Yeah, that's we believe it's very important to have the option to finance early. So we've got a number of 22 crop loans already on the books, ready to go. We think there's a significant economic advantage to be able to be a cash buyer, to lock in some of those inputs, to make sure that you're ready to pick up, retain or pick up additional rented land. I think it is very critical to have that flexibility.
Your approach is different from a number of standpoints. You really want to work with that multi-generational farm that in many instances is renting quite a bit of ground, may not necessarily own so much ground.
Yeah, and we looked at the growing segment of operators that that rent more land than they own, and we know that segment continues to grow substantially, and that segment has generally had some challenges meeting traditional loan metric underwrite. So what we're looking at is their ability to produce the crop. We're still looking for top-notch farmers. We're looking for their risk management strategy, whether that's their crop insurance, and we look very closely at their marketing plan to lend on their ability to produce and the risk management tools they have in place. We're not relying on their balance sheet because that, for many farmers, that does not work very well.
Sounds almost like heresy in the banking industry, not relying on a balance sheet. Yeah. But you want to see a productive farmer, a profitable farmer, and you look at a number of dynamics there.
Yeah, and I've been lending on agriculture for 40 plus years, so I understand the balance sheet. The balance sheet really is the story of the history of that farm and how they built equity over time. I have, as a lender, having a strong balance sheet is not a bad place to be. But for an operator that's looking at really leveraging efficiency and growing their business, it's difficult, as you know, to build equity in real estate at the current prices. So we want to look at their ability to produce a crop. The primary credit metric for any lender is their ability to produce and pay back a loan. So that's what we're focused on. And our model fits well, as you pointed out, with multi-generational farms where you've got that next generation coming along, good productive farmers. The balance sheet may stay with the parents in terms of their lending, or they're growing to incorporate that next generation, and the parents want to be fair to the farming versus non-farming, and since we're looking at their ability to produce a crop and other risk mitigants, we can lend and not mess with their estate plan.
FarmOp.com is the best website, or FarmOpCapital.com?
FarmOp.com.
Thank you for the visit, sir. We appreciate it. Visiting with us in the studio, the Chief Executive Officer of FarmOp Capital, Bill York.
Greg Solier now brings us his farm weather forecast for the week ahead, presented by Pivot Bio Proven 40. Predictable, productive, weatherproof. Turn to a better nitrogen. Turn to Pivot Bio Proven 40. Learn more at pivotbio.com.
We heard from meteorologist Greg Solier at the top of the show talking about the drought, but now it's time for a little more short-term outlook. Greg, this next week, what do you expect in the Pacific Northwest?
It takes weeks and months and sometimes years to get into this drought category, so it's not going to happen overnight or in the short term of it all, but we're seeing a kind of an evolution of a little more typical fall setup. La Niñas, though, are not conducive as they apply to a good part of the west and southwest to getting significant winter recharge. We do have a system offshore, Northern California, coastal sections of the Pacific Northwest. Pretty quiet weather picture, northern and central Rockies, and you want more late summer warmth in these early days of October, and certainly opportunities for fall field work. You're going to get it across the Canadian Prairie and Northern Plains, despite, I know, the ongoing dryness and drought. Usually La Niñas are conducive if we don't lock the grounds up to getting some significant moisture into the Northern Plains with time later in the fall season. Another weak system ashore, Northern California, Pacific Northwest, Willamette Valley. Pretty quiet weather picture again across areas of the divide into the northern and central plains. No cold air whatsoever or major storm is in sight for the Canadian Prairie and Pacific Northwest. Southwestern part of the country, the tail end of a front may be dropping temperatures a bit into the valleys of California. Stray shower across the Sierra. Monsoon season is over with over the desert Southwest. Late season warmth under the southern plains. Had some nice moisture last week into areas of the plains. It's back into largely dry time both early in the week, again later in the week as well. Maybe a stray shower thunderstorm into the foothills. Maybe some summertime warmth still on the maps and charts, pushing 85 to 90 southern plain states areas, and some of those winter wheat fields will pop coming off the recent moisture. Cooler air moving into the valleys of California late in the week.
Greg, those warmer than average temperatures across the Corn Belt will certainly help the crop dry down. What do you expect to see this next week?
A little slower pace, a little more normalization of temperatures for now, but there's more late season heat, October style, into these eastern Corn Belt areas where there's still some leftover shower activity. Lower Lakes region, Ohio Valley early in the week. Warm, dry, high pressure, temperatures recovering. Low afternoon humidity, plenty of opportunity for harvest into the western Corn Belt. A weak system along the divide out through Big Sky country will head to the Canadian Prairie. Scant moisture chances at best there. Look at this late season summer-like warmth back into the upper Midwest. Pretty quiet weather picture across much of the eastern Corn Belt. A stray shower at the Ohio. Again, opportunities for fall field work to resume into the eastern Corn Belt with time. This weather system here is the one that brought the rains into parts of the southeastern plains a few days ago. Still lingering into the Delta southeastern states where you got cotton harvest going on. You got rice and peanuts as well. Probably some lengthy delays with this weather system slow to move out of the Delta and points out of the east. Late season warmth and drying gets underway from Kansas on southward again later in the week.
Take us all the way to the East Coast. Greg, what do you see next week?
Back into a pretty quiet weather picture for the northern sections of the Great Lakes, western Corn Belt locales. This front, though, will provide some meaningful moisture for the northeast and New England. It'll kind of flatten on out, keep weather unsettled for the mid-Atlantic region back to the Ohio Valley. Opportunities for fall field work and harvest back into play across much of the northern through western Corn Belt later on into the week. Into the southeastern part of the country, had some dryness and drought earlier in the year. That's gone, the tropical systems, but these fronts are now hung on up and an upper air weather system as well, where showers and thunderstorms are back into play from the Delta on east a good part of the week. Plan accordingly.
Greg Solier is back with his extended farm weather forecast for the country, presented by Pivot BioProven 40. Predictable, productive, weatherproof. Turn to a better nitrogen. Turn to Pivot BioProven 40. Learn more at pivotbio.com.
Greg, let's take a look at precipitation this next week. What's on the radar?
Well, not much as it applies to the northern and central plains again, the western states, and what there is of moisture into the maybe quarter to locally half-inch category occurs very early in the week for the Great Lakes region into the Ohio Valley. This is the corridor of wet weather for a good part of this week with cotton harvest getting going, rice and peanuts and all that. So the recharge is going on here. Not much in the way of tropical moisture expected. Dry through Texas, the southwestern states, maybe some spotty moisture up to a quarter inch in the Pacific Northwest. Hard to get anything significant east of the Cascades here for this week.
Greg, how about the week of October 11th? What do you see?
Anything but an October feel out there. Look at these temperatures here. Probably some record and near record setting warmth, coupled, by the way, mind you, with low afternoon humidity, a bit of a breeze. That compressional warming usually means some good moisture reduction dry down and evaporative losses. So the bottom line, some harvest opportunities here with temperatures in mind, down a bit below average over the southeastern part of the country, Pacific Northwest. And the moisture pattern is of benefit. Northern California, Pacific Northwest. Look at the resumption of dry time across the plains and ongoing across much of the Corn Belt. Maybe a little tropical weather to keep an eye out for over the eastern states. Otherwise, the moisture is appreciated into the northeast and New England.
When we get to that third week in October, Greg, do the temperatures start to moderate?
Not anything into a typical autumn sense or feel. This is late season heat, maybe some records to be set over parts of the Dakotas, the upper Midwest, much of the Corn Belt, cloudiness and some leftover moisture with temperatures a bit below average here, and slight cooling with the trough into Northern California and the Pacific Northwest. And the moisture pattern continues to be scant at best, so we get some topsoil recharge. We get the winter wheat a-going, and we're back into dry time here over the southern plains across much of the Corn Belt. Yes, it is a La Nina, but we're going to have to wait till much later in the fall season and winter to get this moisture pattern going here. Wet through the southeastern part of the country, keeping an eye on the Atlantic and the tropics, and some good news at least, Big Sky country into the Pacific Northwest. Moisture on the increase there.
And now, Greg, that final week in October takes us to Halloween. Will it be temperate for trick-or-treating?
Nothing too spooky as it appears right now with temperatures. We do see a little more of a trough, but these have been progressive, as in they move along. They don't establish themselves across the heartland. So some cooling expected all the way to the valleys of California. A little more of a late October feel for Big Sky Country, the Canadian Prairie. But the warmth continues on. Southern Plains into much of the eastern Corn Belt. The northeast to New England temperatures about average down Florida ways, where the moisture does pick up. But again, progressive. I guess the weather systems are moving. They're not getting locked down. So yeah, there may be some harvest delays over sections of the Corn Belt. Ongoing wet weather and more dominant harvest delays over this part of the country with cotton in mind. Back into dry time for the Rio Grande, Southern California. Good news for the northern and central plains, Pacific Northwest. The moisture pattern is above average. That should continue here for the foreseeable future.
Next on This Week in Agribusiness, it's Max's Tractor Shed, spotlighting another great American tractor.
He keeps his farm equipment clean. He has quite a reputation for clean farm equipment, but not all of it is new, as you're going to see in Max's Tractor Shed, brought to you by Store Lock Tool Cabinets. You need to put your hands on one if you see them at a show somewhere, and then you need to put your hands on one in your shop. Stability, durability, and they're attractive too. Go to storelock.com to find out more. Well, Andy Pastor farms in Ontario, Canada, and he's got quite a reputation across the agriculture social media because his equipment looks so doggone clean. Yeah, he has clean combines sitting there in the shop. You can see that. They are clean. Oh, and there's a sticker on them. It says Andy Clean. He has a sticker that he sends out to people if their equipment is clean. But some of his equipment is old. Here's a 1966 Farmall 656. That one is as clean as a pin, too. Oh, with a colorator on it there in the shop in Southwest Ontario, Canada. You bet it's Andy Clean, all right. Andy Pastor. Well, let's find out what's looking good, nice and clean, certified clean at a Big Iron auction.
Well, hello, Max. The auctions on BigIron.com feature some outstanding equipment, and this week is no exception. David Oken is retiring from Chadron, Nebraska. He's got some Case IH equipment, including an MX 240 mechanical front tractor. He's got two Case IH 1680 combines. He's got a really nice Freightliner grain truck selling as well. Swan Farms are retiring from Liberal, Kansas. Check out their John Deere 9200 four-wheel drive tractor. We've also got some really nice equipment scattered throughout the country. In Moscow, Kansas, check out the 2019 Gleaner S97 Super Series Combine. It only has 187 hours on the separator, and the owner, Robert Fox, will tell you all about that good quality machine. We've also in Red Oak, Iowa, have a 1996 International 2554 floater spreader. In Syracuse, Kansas, folks, there's a New Holland TJ 325 four-wheel drive tractor. In Lincoln, Nebraska, there's a Volvo BL70 loader backhoe selling to the highest bidder. And we've got some really nice grain trailers, including a 2009 Wilson tri-axle grain trailer. It's a 50-footer, and it will sell with no reserve. Remember to download the Big Iron auction app on your smartphone or your mobile device and watch these items sell with no reserve on BigIron.com.
The FFA Chapter Tribute is sponsored by Nationwide, the #1 farm insurer in the country. To register your FFA chapter, go to nationwidesupportsffa.com. That's nationwidesupportsffa.com. Nationwide. We stand for you.
This Week in Agribusiness is proud to continue our salute to the FFA, and we're getting to know the leaders of the Indiana State FFA. Joining us this week is Jordan Wickard. She is the State Treasurer. Jordan, fill us in. What are the duties of the FFA State Treasurer in Indiana?
As the FFA State Treasurer, it is my job to make sure that our records are being kept in line and making sure that we have enough money at the end of the year for that next team that is coming in. With that, the State Treasurer, really, it just depends on the year. And for me, it's really interesting because at the beginning of the year, we assign different roles and tasks based on our strengths. And so one of my strengths is social media. And so I'm able to work with our president, Courtney Audie, that also decided to sign up for that job as well. And we have currently been working on the social media. So while I am state treasurer, I keep track of the books as well. But we each have our individual tasks that we enjoy doing. And so for me, that's social media.
Very cool. Jordan, what was it all those years ago that first got you interested in joining the FFA?
When I first joined the FFA organization, I actually had my first encounter as a sixth grader when I attended my first state FFA convention with my mom, who was judging the prepared public speaking contest. And so throughout that time, I had the opportunity to listen to those speeches, and I was a shy and timid sixth grader that had no reason to talk to anyone. But as I attended that first session that night, I found out that FFA was my home and a place I felt at home. And so ever since then, I started getting involved in agriculture. And I actually come from a rural background. We raise Angus cattle as well as boar goats and market lambs. And so that's a little bit how I got started.
That is very cool. And after your year of service, you plan on going to Purdue to continue your career in agriculture. Jordan, thanks for joining us.
Now, Samuelson Says. Insight and commentary from Orion Samuelson.
I'd like to talk money with you this week on Samuelson Says. As a matter of fact, some pretty big money. I got it in this release from the American Farm Bureau Federation, so let me quote. The Farm Bureau Ag Innovation Challenge, launched in 2015, is a national business competition that showcases U.S. startups developing innovative solutions to address challenges facing America's farmers, ranchers, and rural communities. Now in its 8th year, the American Farm Bureau Federation, in partnership with Farm Credit, is looking to identify the top entrepreneurs who are addressing both traditional challenges farmers face, as well as entrepreneurs who are addressing new challenges facing farmers and rural communities. Farm Bureau will award $165,000 in startup funds to 10 businesses, culminating at a live competition at the AFVF convention in January of 2022 in Atlanta, Georgia. The Ag Innovative Challenge winner will be awarded $50,000 in startup funds, provided by sponsors Farm Credit, Bayer Crop Sciences, John Deere, Farm Bureau Bank, and FMC Corporation. President of the American Farm Bureau, Zippy Duval, summed it up. Quote, "The future of agriculture will rely on innovative solutions to the challenges we face. The Ag Innovation Challenge helps entrepreneurs grow their ideas into products that support farmers and ranchers in their mission to provide the food, fuel, and fiber that we all rely on." The words of Zippy Duval. Big money, as I said. My thoughts on Samuelson Says.
Harvest time is a season when a lot of us out in rural America have plenty of time to do some thinking. Whether we're sitting in the combine cab or the grain cart cab or the semi-truck cab or just helping out with the other odds and ends around the farm, we get plenty of time to dwell on our industry. Max has also been doing some thinking, and he's had a few things on his mind.
Mike, I have to say volunteerism has been on my mind over the past few days, especially as we come into National Fire Prevention Week and after a high-profile incident that we saw just about a week ago. You know, in the rural communities all across the country, we don't have many professional first responders. There are law enforcement officers who many times are full-time. There are some emergency medical personnel, certainly the people at hospitals, but many of the first responders in rural communities are volunteer firefighters, volunteer EMS personnel. Yes, they have trained. They have a limited amount of training. Some of them have to train on a regular basis, to be sure, but it's not like they are full-time professionals. These are people who have other jobs. They are teachers, preachers, physicians, many farmers and ranchers across America who come responding in a time of need. That's what happened on Saturday afternoon a week ago when the Empire Builder headed west in Montana between Joplin and Chester, Montana, had that derailment along the tracks. The chief investigator for the National Transportation Safety Board out on that scene praised the first responders. He said 98% of them were volunteers. And if you look at photographs of that accident scene, you look around at the people standing out there, nobody was wearing protective turnout gear, such as that issued to full-time firefighters or volunteer fire departments. These were people who came running. They dropped what they were doing on that Saturday afternoon to respond in a time of need. It's a reminder, I guess, to many of us when we're traveling across the heartland of America, whether we're on the interstates or we're on an intercity train, that we may very well be in better hands than we thought, simply because there are dedicated volunteers who come responding in a time of need. That's that ethic out there in the countryside of man helping man. It's something I thought we should keep in mind here as we go into National Fire Prevention Week. Mike?
Thank you, Max. And I think it's worth noting that that spirit of volunteerism is alive across the country. 67% of all firefighters in America are volunteer. This Week in Agribusiness is proud to salute those who take their time to keep their communities safe. Thanks to all of you for tuning in. We'll be back next week, and we look forward to you joining us right here at the same time on This Week in Agribusiness.
Closed captioning for This Week in Agribusiness is brought to you by Kubota. Shape your world. This Week in Agribusiness is brought to you by Firestone. You never farm alone. This Week in Agribusiness is produced by Omax Communication in association with 22 Creative Group. We invite you to visit us online at agbizweek.com.